He was extremely bright. His teachers, I actually was able to interview two of his teachers, one from high school and one from public school. I was able to track them down. They were quite elderly, of course, by the time I got in touch with them. And they both immediately remembered him, and they both mentioned how bright he was, and unusually bright, and unusually sort of sensitive and mature for somebody his age. And then, of course, because he served in the intelligence section and he worked his way up from being an enlisted person up into to the officer corps, which was very unusual at the time. There were clear signs that he was obviously a very able person, even as a young man without an education. And of course, also having had the sort of maturing experience he'd had because of his parents and the family breakdown and so on, he was mature enough and able enough to handle all those sort of diverse demands and be able to work his way through to be able to get the opportunity to go to school. I actually started it as a postdoctoral fellow. When I finished my PhD, I made application to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, one of the big granting agencies in Canada, to do a postdoc. And this was the project that I proposed, was an intellectual biography of John Porter. And because it hadn't been done before, it was seen to be a worthy kind of project. And so I received some money to get it going. And so I worked on it essentially full-time for 2 years. And then I got a job teaching, first at Memorial University in Newfoundland, and then I came here to the University of Waterloo. And because of other demands on my time, other research projects I got involved in, teaching, family responsibilities, the usual stuff you have when you're a younger faculty member. Right. This sometimes got shuffled off to a kind of a side project, and I went back and forth with it. In the end, it took me nearly 23 years of on and off, mostly off work, to finish the thing. And it's a very detailed look at his life. So that, for example, when I wrote the section about his military career that I talked about just a minute ago, I was able to track down one of his former commanding officers. I read several books that had to do with the war itself. I read a book that had to do with the regiment to which Porter belonged. I found a book and read a book about the intelligence service during World War II. And then, as it turned out, in a way, luckily and by chance, because it took me so long to write the book, 20 years after he was dead, the Freedom of Information Act allows you to have access to somebody's full military record. So I wrote without having permission of the family or anything. So I wrote away and I got his full military record, which turned out to be, this huge 200-page pile of everything from his dental records to his hospital records to literally an almost daily accounting of where he was and what he was doing for the entire duration of the 6 years that he was in the war. So I had a sort of an embarrassment of riches of material to work with, and this was not just for that part of his career, but for pretty much all of his career, because as a consequence of the fact that he didn't die until 1979, of course he was still around and teaching in the 60s and the 70s. And so there were lots of his colleagues and friends and students and his family members who were around to be interviewed. And so I interviewed his sister, I interviewed his brother, I interviewed his wife, I interviewed his 3 children. He was married twice and had children from each marriage. And so I had a huge pile of material from which to work, and of course it ends up then producing a book, that you have in front of you there, which with the footnotes is about 600 pages long.